Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 50. Yeah. For the audience out there, this is going to be, as I've hinted at for quite some time now, a different show because if you might have just picked up on, I don't have one guest. I don't have two guests. I have three guests tonight. And they're all back by popular demand. So quickly doing quick intros across the table here, the digital table that being. Back from episode 24, the employee loyalty expert, Heather Younger. Heather, welcome back.
Hello there. Glad to be back.
Then coming back from episode 30, the younger guy, George. George, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And then finally, the professional growth expert, Keisha Rivers. Keisha, it's so great to have you back on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no. Guys, we talked about this for quite some time now. Super stoked. Let's dive in. So it's basically a panel discussion, free for all. I'm going to throw out a topic. You can feel free to throw out a topic and free for all chatting about it. So the first thing I want to throw out there, and I'm kind of going to throw, Heather and George against each other here, maybe. I was reading an interesting article once upon a time, and I forget the exact stats in my head, but millennials are basically going to go through an exponential number of jobs/careers compared to the rest of us. How in the heck are leaders supposed to, develop employee loyalty knowing that their future main workforce is just going to pull a pin and run off anyway? What are your thoughts out there?
I'll take a stab at this one. I'll jump in here because I'm a millennial myself, and I think that comes down to really understanding what motivates individuals, whether they're millennials or whatever generation they're from. Millennials especially though, because there's some interesting data out there. That, you really want to move them through promotions and opportunities quickly. And so there's a couple ways to do that. If you work for a company or if you're a leader and you don't have much room for advancement up, so you're managing a team and there's not a ton of room there for your team to move up quickly, you want to give them responsibilities just to add on to their role. It might not be a promotion, but just constantly giving the high performers more. And that usually will satiate a lot of the millennials' desire to move up quickly. But you really want to do a lot of recognition with them. But you're right. You're spot on. They like to move up quickly. They don't like to sit still for very long in a certain job or a certain company. But I think companies can retain really good employees by doing a good job of recognizing them more often. So be a little louder in your celebrations when they do good work. But then also, find a way if you don't have the latitude of new positions in your company, find a way to give them additional responsibility, maybe a lead, like a semi-lead role within their team and among their peers, and constantly giving them more. And then obviously if they're a high performer, eventually they will get that next role.
Yeah. And this is Heather. I want to add in that. George, absolutely. I think that's exactly what I would say. So I couldn't say that part any better. I would add two things. One, I am the furthest thing from millennial you're going to get. Okay. So let me just be clear about that. Having said that, I am that exact same description. I like to move up and around. I like to be recognized often. I want people to recognize the gifts that I have and use those to the nth degree. And so I don't see as many differences in millennials as other people do, because I believe I have a lot in common with them. But having said that, I think on top of what George said, I think it would be important to listen to those millennials. So grabbing together kind of a group of those folks that are willing to participate in the workplace and creating some kind of focus group with them. Maybe even branding that group to be an ongoing group that continues to give you feedback related to their experience, what the things that they're looking for in the environment, where the gaps might exist, and work with them to brainstorm ideas on how you can customize their experience through your organization. So I think you talk about what George talked about. It's excellent. But then we're going to go a little deeper and customize that by actually listening to their voices.
No, those are all great points, folks. And luckily for me, I guess I don't have to worry about that stuff at my job because being in the army life makes things simple because us, army guys are knuckle draggers, right? We like things really simple. So, we don't necessarily have to worry about them. But the interesting thing about us, in the army, and I'm going to throw out, I guess a little thing, one interesting thing that has come out about, especially with the millennials, is, their need for connection. And they found actually, so in basic training, you basically get segregated from complete life, right? Your whole old life, you get segregated from it. Where they were actually finding that it was extremely difficult to achieve what we're trying to achieve in basic training because all these new recruits were coming through and they didn't have access to their phones and their social life and all this stuff. And it was having severe negative impacts. And now, don't get me wrong, it's nothing to do with how people are changing jobs. At the same time, when we actually had to change our mentality for basic training and allow the recruits access to phones sooner than normal because they were actually finding people were, pulling pin and getting out, falling off training much sooner than before statistically. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, sorry, what was that, Keisha?
Yeah, it's one of those things where there's a need for connection, not just in terms of, and your example was great and, prime example about how when you have people that are working in an environment, they need to feel some type of connection, with their previous lives or develop some type of connection within the new unit that you're trying to form. So, people always talk about millennials and that, they're flighty and they don't want to stick to anything and all of that kind of stuff. It's just that they look for ways of being fulfilled and connected to whatever it is that they're doing. So the suggestions that George and Heather gave were right on point, but I'm kind of with Heather. I'm not millennial by any stretch of the imagination, but my whole thing is I operate the same way. And I'm finding that when you create opportunities for people to connect and develop that connection, then you're going to find that you're going to have a better workforce and you're going to have people that are more willing to run through a wall for you and to, really show up because they feel like they're a part of something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, those are all great points, guys. Really, really, really good discussion there on, and I try not to pick on millennials, but it's just really interesting, reading that article. And I was like, we got George coming on, the millennial guy, and Heather coming on, the training, the employee loyalty type. I'm like, let's talk about this. So as I was telling you, not to the audience, I was telling them that episodes 50 is a big deal for me because, most podcasts don't survive past, what did I say? I think it was 2 to 3 months. There's 20 episodes, something along those lines. Anyway, I'm celebrating. So I do have a glass of red here tonight, with me. We are changing things up on the show, on the Moving Forward Leadership podcast, and we're having a little bit of fun. So cheers everybody to my episode 50 and, thanks for being here.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
I've got wine too, so. Nice.
That a boy, George. My last episode that I released at the time of this recording, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head right now, but anyway, I think it's 42. Was about transparency. Now, and it's funny because I was having a conversation with something, actually my last interview, when we were discussing the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal, which I actually got personally affected by because we did have a polluting Volkswagen Jetta TDI.
Oh.
Yeah. I won't get started on that because I could go on a complete rant about that whole scandal and debacle and how things run out. But I get to tie those things together and move that conversation forward a little bit. Like, what do you guys think, where does leaders fail in large corporations for transparency? Because you see it in these larger organizations. Volkswagen's one example. The BP spill a number of years ago was another one where leadership weren't quite transparent on what was going on, what happened, what transpired, yada yada. What do you think? Were some of the failures there, and how can we get around them?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this one here and kick it off. Obviously, as a leader, I think transparency builds credibility. So I think if you if you come across, you don't want your team thinking that you know something that they don't. So you want to be as extremely transparent as you can with your role, and then you're also your team as well. I just think it builds a lot of trust. I'm in the sales field, so it goes both ways where you build trust with your team, but then also when you're engaging customers, you want to be as transparent as possible about your process as well, and that builds credibility with the customers. So absolutely. I mean, there's certain things obviously proprietary things you can and can't say, but I never once wanted my team to even think for a second that I knew something about the company that they didn't, or I knew something about their future they didn't. So I was always extremely transparent, because if you lose that buy-in from them, like they think that you know things or you're withholding information, then that's a slippery slope that a leader will go downhill pretty quickly and lose grip on their team. But 100%. I think also owning your mistakes too. So going back to, disasters, BP spill, things like that. There's a right and wrong way to handle that, right? So I think if you come forward and own it, because leaders aren't perfect. So if you're not perfect, it's okay to tell your team you don't know it all. You're not going to have all the answers. Like you and I talked about it, Sky, like you might have all the questions, but you're not always going to have all the answers. So don't set up the front with your team that you know it all, or you have all the answers and you're there, you're there because you're a good leader, not necessarily because you have all the answers. So, I think transparency helps build on a lot of those topics. No,
absolutely. And I love that credibility piece, because it's so true, right? And credibility is cornerstone of leadership. I don't care what anybody says. Once you lose credibility, you got nothing, in my mind. Keisha, you got any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I am 100% in agreement that you have to have transparency as a leader. And I agree with what George said. You cannot go in having people think you have all the answers. That's just the wrong way to approach it. You need to set it up where you know how to question. And the work that I do with organizations, I'm always teaching them about facilitating the process and facilitating the outcome, which means that you're not driving it, but you're guiding it through questions that you ask, and not being afraid to say, I don't know. Google's my friend. I don't claim to have all the information stored up here, and I don't know every single thing, because as a leader, you're modeling what other people are doing. And if people constantly think, oh, I have to be perfect at this job, then what happens if you have an employee who doesn't understand something? They don't understand, a new process or a new procedure, or there's a reporting system that they don't quite get. Instead of them coming to you early to tell you, hey, this is giving me problems, they're going to try to fake it until they make it. And then, who knows how much money that's going to cost you down the line. You do have to set the stage for people to be able to say, hey, it's okay for me not to know, but it's not okay for me not to try to find out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to add something to that, because that triggered a thought of mine is so you don't know everything, right? But, and I think it's okay definitely okay to represent that. And I think like when you have a team member come to you and they want to know how to do something or how to go about a certain challenge that they're facing, it's way better to guide them to the answer, as Keisha said, rather than just give them the answer. You don't want to always give the answer. Even though you know it right off the rip, you can give them the answer, but you want to get them thinking a certain point, like through development. So you want to challenge them. So ask them probing questions and lead them to the answer. So for them, it's self-discovery, and it gives your team members more confident, because then you're guiding them there. You're not telling them, but to them, they're like, oh, wow, I kind of figured it out on my own. And that's going to develop your team much more quickly than you constantly giving the answer to things. So.
Exactly. And I want to take a little bit of different approach to this, actually, is thinking about why leaders choose not to be transparent. And so I'm thinking, right, the biggest thing there's two things. One is fear. They're afraid that their team members cannot handle the truth. They don't know. They're afraid of what their responses might be if they found out the truth, whatever that truth is. The truth could be positive. The truth could be negative. They don't trust that their people know how to handle the truth. That's number one. Number two, executive leaders are really kind of trained not to be transparent. There's this thing called executive presence. which means you talk a lot less and you have a way that you walk in the door, right? And I actually think we should turn that on its head. I think executive presence has so much more to do with connecting with our people in very deep and meaningful ways.
Absolutely.
It's not how you walk in the door. It's how you connect to the people that are inside the room that you're going into.
100%.
So that's kind of how I want to approach it.
Love it.
100%. And going back to the executive presence, especially from at that C-suite level, right, that's where, going back to piggyback off the millennial question, that's where you get disengagement, because they are quick to sniff out whether you have a transparent approach or a transparent company, and it's all top down. If the top down's not transparent, your millennial staff's going to pick up on that quickly, and they're going to become disengaged, and they're going to become low performing employees and eventually leave, where you probably have some really good employees, but if you don't have that top down approach where the executive team leads through transparency, then it's just going to create risks at the organization. Couldn't agree more.
Those are
and
awesome.
That's because they don't trust, right? They don't they don't trust one another. Yeah. So
right.
because they don't trust them, and they don't trust. It's just like a vicious cycle. If the leadership team doesn't trust their people and doesn't reveal certain parts to their people, then their people aren't going to trust them, and they're going to lose them. It's a vicious cycle. To the same extent, I do have to say I've been in organizational development roles for pretty large organizations, and we do have to time how we release information sometimes. And I'm not trying to be political. It is what it is. Sometimes if you know there's like some things happening in a row, you don't want to go first with this until this thing happens, or else now you've got people's hopes up. Now you've lost trust over here. So there's a lot of there's a complex web in all of this. So there's a level of transparency, and it's the leader who understands how far to go. And I know you know this, Scott, in the military, from a tactical standpoint, you have to come forward, but you can't tell everything sometimes. You have to wait till a couple steps get done before you can tell the next step, right?
I'm actually dealing with one of those situations literally right now.
But the other thing is, Heather, that if you have developed a culture of trust where your people trust that you have their best interest at heart and that you're going to move forward in a way where they can follow you, then they understand that there's some things that you can't reveal, and that, there's certain parameters and other things that are going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But that whole thing of, I have to trust that I know that whatever decision you make, it's going to be good. And I'm not going to be blindsided by something that's going to either completely undermine what it is that I'm doing. It's going to completely, decimate, the progress that we're making or anything. But there still has to be some level of transparency that builds a foundation of trust, so that I can, hey, it's okay that, you couldn't tell me that, because I know that there are other complex things going on, but I do trust that when it matters, I can come to you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that goes back to always sharing the why behind decisions and what changes happen. So when you do have to withhold certain information for timing or performance or whatever it is, and then you release that information, tell them why. And just, the why can be so powerful, and there's so many, and there's a lot of leaders out there that are hesitant to share that, but I think the why goes back to that transparency thing. Explain why. It's not you. You're working in the best interest of your team for certain. A lot of times it's around performance when you're withholding information. You want them focused on a certain thing, and it's okay to share that. Like, hey, I wanted you guys focused on this, and this could have pulled your attention away, and it's not earth shattering, or else I would have told you. And I think that level of transparency, it goes a long way, man. Long way.
What a great conversation of this little topic here. This is phenomenal. I just like to take it probably another 10,000 feet higher. So we talked a lot about the ground level stuff, and then a little bit about organizational. I'm going to talk like some strategic level thing, and I'm going to use the personal Volkswagen example here. So I totally found that the company wasn't that forthcoming. They dug their heels in, they dragged, and the process dragged on. It was ridiculously long for us to finally get our settlement. It took years after the U.S. got their settlement up here in Canada, and we're two independent countries. So their end argument was, for the reason why the two deals were slightly different. It's like, well, they're two different countries, so you have to go through two different judicial systems, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, great. So why did you wait until the U.S. one was done to start the Canadian one then? Doesn't make sense to me. So if you're going to use that argument on one side of the coin, you can't use it on the other side of the coin. So ultimately, I'm like, you guys, you're hiding crap. You're not being transparent. You know what? I'm done. Take this car. Give me my check. I am never stepping foot in another one of these dealerships ever again. And I'll make sure my son and my future baby do not step foot in a Volkswagen Auto Group dealership ever again. And that kind of pains me because I actually really like Audi. But anyway, but the moral story is there. Like, customers are done, and I'm not the only one, right? And it's just like, if you guys were just a little bit more transparent, if you didn't drag your heels for so long, came in and say, we messed up, we're going to fix it. Give us a little bit of time. You know what? Maybe I'd have another Volkswagen in the driveway. Maybe it wouldn't be a Ford Edge. It'd be a Volkswagen that was.
Well, yeah, it's funny, Scott, because I actually think, I truly believe this, that what's true for customers is what's true for employees. They all need to trust the brands they're either working for or buying from. There's no differences. There really are, except, you could argue that there's a difference between the employer-employee relationships and the customer and that brand, the vendor relationship. But because there's more of maybe almost like a fiduciary feel between the employer-employee.
And don't get me wrong, it's actually more complex than what we even know, because the dealerships themselves were caught off guard. Like, they didn't even know themselves. So they're just as shocked and basically done by as what I, as the customer, was. But they kind of still have to be loyal because they're trying to make their money off that brand.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I was going to say too, I mean, as a leader, when things get rough, one of the best traits you can have as a leader is own it. Like, everything is on you. Yeah. Everything. Like, it doesn't matter. Good, bad, and different. You have to own it.
So sorry to cut you off, George.
Go for it.
One of my favorite sayings is and I say it to my guys all the time, like, you're the reason for our successes. I'm the reason for the failures. Let's make that divide line right now. Right. So
it's so true. And so, so when you win, you give all the gratitude and love to your team, because they're the ones that did that, not you. But when things go south, you have to have 1000% ownership of it. And I think when you realize that at the end of the day, everything is your fault, you can be in a really good place as a leader and lead a lot better if you have full accountability and 100% ownership of what goes on in your team. And it gets you to a different spot as a professional and as a leader. And, you can make decisions better and just owning everything, but yeah, absolutely. And one thing when I transitioned, I come from the sales field. So, one thing, as a young leader, I was always a top performer as an individual contributor. So before I took the leadership role, I was always kind of managing my own portfolio and selling, and I never had a team working for me. And it's really interesting is when you're a high performer in sales, everything's about you. You get all the love, you get all the gratitude, you get everything because you're performing well, you get all the recognition. And then when you go to being a sales leader, well, everything goes away. It is not about you at all anymore. It doesn't matter. So you have to make that mental shift, and that's really owning the good, the bad, and the ugly, really.
Absolutely.
But a lot of times when you talk about owning it, there are some people that don't make that shift because they get into I got to cover my butt type of deal.
Yep.
And so you end up with this scenario where everybody starts passing the buck, which I think is probably what happened with the Volkswagen deal, is because people were passing the buck and they were digging their heels in, and internally there may have been some difficulty in trying to figure out who was going to take the blame for it and actually man up, because nobody wanted to lose their job over this. Nobody wanted to say, okay, you know what?
It's definitely going self-preservation mode, and every woman for themselves at that point.
Right. And that's the thing of when you look at an organization and we talk about team building and we talk about trust and we talk about transparency, but when the rubber meets the road and it's a crisis and a major crisis, what type of leader are you in terms of, are you going to just step up and say, you know what, we completely foobarred that, this is what we're going to do to try to make it better. And you're going to assume that responsibility because, as they say, like Spider-Man movie, with great power comes great responsibility. So you can't want all the power and none of the responsibility.
It's funny that you said that. Sorry about that. Earlier today, we received news about Bill Cosby, and it hit me in this way. I don't know why. It's like the Me Too movement. All these things are all around the place, and I know it's like a sticky wick to even be going there right on this call, but that has been out there. But for some strange reason, just because I think it was more at home, or it hit home for me because I grew up with him as like a childhood like father mentor kind of thing. When I think about how he could have chosen, and it appeared that he did, but he actually did not. He could have chosen to use his power in a much more positive way, but he, as a leader, because he was a leader of people, think about it, the cast, everything he was on, he was looked up to. So no matter, he was a leader in his workplace. If he had a corporation, he was a leader. And there's so many leaders around us, right, whether it's in the workplace or not. But you think about it on the set and all the things that happen. He could have chosen to use positive power and do the things we talked about. But he chose to use his power in a negative way. And it's like those things that leaders do where they make those cognitive choices to be negative and to do the things that drive people away instead of being more magnetic, like the transparency and, sitting down and having one-on-ones with them and showing people they're important and actively listening to them, those kind of things, right? And it's like, it's just so interesting. It's almost like what makes people go to jail and what makes people do this bad thing? It's very fascinating to me how people can choose that. Some people choose that power and they give it away from doing philanthropic stuff, or they it's just crazy. And then you have the others who just do what Bill Cosby did. He was a multimillionaire and just, walked right into. So those are the kind of things that drive me bonkers. So like you had a choice. All of these leaders, they have choices.
But it goes back to that thing of power. And we talked about when you look at leadership, you have some people that when they get into a quote unquote leadership position, they automatically become drunk with power. I can do this and I can do that.
It's all about me.
Right. It's all about me. And you can't say that to me. I can, and it's this whole thing of, I told somebody at one point, I recognized that power was a very fluid concept and that it was really not what I thought it was when I was teaching first grade. And I was locked in a room, the only adult with 36-year-olds. I had no power.
Bless you.
None. At all.
Old chaos.
So, but the power I had was perceived, and it came from their belief that I was the authority. Because I looked around one day and I was like, if all of these little suckers decide they're not doing it, it's not getting done.
It's tyranny.
Right. But it's the same thing when you look at teams and leadership within organizations, because ultimately, if the employees or the team or the staff, if they don't follow, and if everybody decides, you know what, we're not doing this, then there really isn't a whole lot that you can do. I mean, you can't shut down your entire company if everybody walks out. So you have to have some balance. And I think that there is I think we give so much, we don't understand enough about the mental aspect of being in leadership positions and how that affects the people that you're working with on your team. Because honestly, for most of us, we're in this whole thing because we're so segmented and they're working and they're trying to save their own job. But, it's like this whole thing when you're driving on the highway, you get behind a couple of trucks and get a caravan. Hey, they can't catch all of us if we're all speeding. Stick together. Somebody will get away.
Pack up.
Right.
That's why it's amazing because the work that I do, people say, well, I thought you were employee engagement. Why are you doing leadership stuff? And I'm like, duh. Leaders drive all of the experience, and I have to change their mindsets in order to improve the employee's journey. So that is why I focus on leaders. But people don't quite understand. Like, well, is it employees or well, it is employees. My end goal is to help them get have a better environment.
It's definitely funny.
Yeah, leaders are the start and stop, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely funny how many pre-calls I've done or email interactions with potential guests I've done, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, we're talking about the bottom line." I'm like, No, not at all. We are not talking about the bottom line.
Yeah.
Indirectly, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But directly, no, not even close. I don't talk money. I don't think I've ever talked money on this show, actually.
Yep.
Yeah.
What, guys, what a conversation. Like, seriously, what a conversation off of transparency. I didn't think it was going to go like that, but it was awesome. And this is exactly what my vision for this episode was all about. Keisha, you mentioned earlier about leadership response in Starbucks. Crisis in Starbucks. I'm not fully tracking that. Maybe this is a U.S. thing, but fill us in and let's see what we got to say.
Well, it's a U.S. thing. There was in Philadelphia, there were two African-American men that walked into a Starbucks. They were waiting on a friend of theirs to come, and one of them asked to use the restroom. The manager said that the restroom was only available to paying customers, and they said, well, we're waiting on somebody. We'll order when they get here. And so the manager walks over and says, well, are you going to buy something now? And they said, well, no, we're waiting for a friend. So she or he calls the police, and the police show up, and the accounts are different. On the one hand, the manager says that the police asked the men to leave, and why were they still there? The men say that when the cops showed up, all they did was basically arrest them, and they're just like, well, why are we being arrested? I mean, they were handcuffed, and it was videotaped, and it went viral of these
in a big
guys
way
being handcuffed and escorted out of a Starbucks. And the guy that they were waiting on because they were looking at doing a real estate deal or something was a white guy. He walks in when his two friends he's meeting are being handcuffed and walked out of Starbucks. And he's like, what did they do? I don't get this. What did they do? So
he's saying that on the video. He's saying that on the video just for them to know. He's saying, what did they do on the video while they're arresting him?
Yes. And so as a result, the CEO of Starbucks flew to Philadelphia to meet with the two guys that were arrested. There were no charges filed. And he's closing 8,000 stores on May 29th, I think it is, or 26th or whatever it is. He's shutting them all down to do cultural unconscious bias training for everybody.
It's actually racial bias training, funny enough. Yeah. Racial bias training. Yeah.
Right. So just again, I'll knuckle drag on this one. They wanted to use the bathroom. Who cares? You're not.
But here's the debate. Okay.
Oh my God.
The CEO of Starbucks, he immediately flew out there. He met with the guys. He issued a statement. This is something that, we don't know. This is not what the experience we want for our customers. We're so sorry about this. We obviously have done a poor job of, training people on racial bias and, this, that, and the other. And so they've been getting some mixed feedback about the fact that they're closing all the stores and mandating all of the employees to go through this training, especially since they made the announcement that they were doing the training and they didn't have the training actually, created. So they were bringing in Eric Holder as one of the people. They were consulting with the NAACP, and they said that they were going to put this in place as a solution. Now, some people are saying, well, you're doing racial bias training, but the issue was that the policy on using the bathroom if you don't buy anything is very subjective. It's like there's some places, I can go to a Starbucks here in Charlotte and sit there all day and nobody bugs me.
Yep. Right in and use the washroom.
Well, and I just went there the other day. I walked in and I had like suit on and everything, but I thought to myself, what if I had my sweatpants? What if I look like I do like right now, which is pretty horrible. What if and then I walked and sat in and I was like, I really have to go to the bathroom, but I better go get a tea and water first. Literally, that's what I thought. Cause I'm like, what if but I had a suit on, so it's probably a lot less likely that it doesn't do anything. But, and so my mind started to think that way. I never think that way, ever. But it was just, I walked in going, I need to
I'll just throw gender into this conversation as well. That's a lady thing. And my wife's the same way. She's like, I got to buy something before I go use the washroom. I'm like, I'll walk in, use the washroom, walk back out. I don't care.
That's a total
But
guy.
it is interesting.
But you know what? At least good on CEO for flying out and meeting with the guys and recognizing that this is not how people should be treated. And side note, I hope they get lifetime free Frappuccino thingy-mabobs.
Yeah. They're going to get more than that, babe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know, right?
See that.
But at the same time, I think, closing every single Starbucks across the U.S. to do training necessarily, I don't know. Maybe
It's swift.
identifying that one manager and making sure that person gets taken care of and trained.
Well, after that news, after all this broke, I don't know if you saw this, Keisha, but after that broke, there was actually like a lot of Hispanic and African American baristas and different folks came forward and said that the climate is very like racially intense. Like it's not actually a good place to work for folks that are minority, which was like, wow.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
A big wake up.
I'm gonna pull the Canadian card. We don't generally get these issues.
Canadian card? Are you serious?
Well, the thing, I actually had written an article about this and some other things, but like after saying, the employer brand is really an issue here because Howard Schultz, I mean, he prides himself, and he did for many, many years on, the diversity and all the things that he would do for transgender and bathroom. I mean, oh my gosh, he'd go overboard. 100%. And so then now he's a chairman, he's not CEO. Right. So they had to be swift in their action in order to be consistent with the brand that he had set up for over 20 years.
Absolutely. Right. Like Starbucks is such a inclusive and everything you mentioned that brand, I actually feel kind of odd going into one now as the standard white guy. It's like, I don't know if I belong here.
But the thing about it is, and they had tried some things around, like remember that campaign that they tried where they wanted their baristas to talk race? And
yes.
Yeah. And it was like, dude, I just want my coffee. I don't want to talk to you about race. I mean, it was one of those things where they were trying.
Did it happen to you?
No.
Did you go in and did they talk? Oh, okay. Cause I didn't get any of that. I'm curious to know if you got it though.
No, okay. No, I didn't. I don't drink their coffee. The only time I go in there is when it's cold enough to get a peppermint hot chocolate. That's the only thing.
Okay.
Because I don't drink coffee.
No, time for you to leave.
Yeah, no, you can handle me on chocolate. This is like hype enough.
I'm talking coffee. Like, how do you not drink coffee? No, anyway.
Yeah, no, I can't do the coffee. The chocolate is and Skittles. Oh my God, we're not.
Oh, this conversation go downhill. So to sum it up, this is why Tim Hortons is obviously superior, ladies and gentlemen. So if you want Tim Hortons, cross the border, come on up to Canada. If one of you
I love it.
show up in Kingston, I will take you to Timmy's myself, and we'll have
Yeah, but I mean, it's just this interesting thing about leadership in response to crisis and that transparency and going to bat and being able to stand up and take responsibility for, Volkswagen, they dug their heels in and they were like, nobody's taking the responsibility for this. We're going to drag in. And then now you have the CEO of Starbucks that, I mean, immediately, as soon as this thing went viral, he was on a plane, out there. He didn't,
good on him, right?
He didn't send anybody. He showed up.
Yeah, no, that is the right thing to do.
Which I think is great. Yeah, it's great. It's just that you're right. People didn't, because they were like, well, the too extreme. It's hard to really win as a leader because you're going to make these decisions. And it really is deep down the right thing, but you're not going to be popular with everybody, especially when it's so massive like Starbucks and the whole community. You know what I mean? Just too many audiences there to please every single one of them.
I can't please 200 of my own people, so guess what?
Oh yeah.
I think it's almost like, it seems like it's almost like in that scenario, he should feel like he can sleep well at night, that he, in his own space and his own skin, did the right thing, irrespective of how, because you just can't please all those audiences. You can't.
Right.
So you almost pick an audience. That's kind of how I am. I pick an audience and choose which one I'm going to please. Because awesome. I can't please everybody.
No, totally agree. Wow. I didn't personally know about this. Didn't hear about it. I'm actually bad at tracking news these days, so that's probably why, because I find news just bothers me.
No, same here.
So what I want to do is actually let's go flip over to the last segment of the panel discussion, and I'm going to let the cannons loose from you guys. I had the three of you on the hot seat. I was peppering you with questions. It's time to quote unquote pay back the favor ish. I know, Heather, you've already done it because I've been on your show, but you get round two now. So this segment. What questions you got for me? You know, let's. Keisha, she looks like she's ready to go. So you get first one. You get first dibs.
Okay, so for someone who has gone through, this is your 50th episode, and you've interviewed all of these people on different aspects of leadership, how have you measured up as a leader based on what you've learned from your guests?
Horribly. Because every episode I'm like, why am I not doing that? How come? Now, don't get me wrong. There's always aspects of every episode, and especially obviously the interviews, right? And I think I've done about 50-50 between solo episodes and interview shows. So about 25 interview guests now, and every one of them is like, there are aspects where we obviously I'm like, yep, okay, I agree with that. Those are things I'm doing, and then there are other aspects I'm like, God dang it, why don't I think of that? How come I've not thought of that? And then I probably spend most of the night after the episode thinking about how I can turn around the next day, implement that. And I think my guys back at work are like, dang it, boss, give up with the podcast. Because I know you interviewed somebody last night, because I walk in like, hey, the good idea fairy's here. And on top of that, I'm transitioning out this summer. So our jobs last, roughly 2 years, and we move on. It's very quick. Turnover's high, and I'm prepping to actually hand over to a successor who's actually in town right now looking to buy her house. But that's a complete sidebar. So I actually said to the guys at one point, I said, all right, I'm locking up the good idea fairy, and we've thrown away the key. And then a few weeks later, my right-hand man comes in, we have a discussion, and long story short, I'm like, you're taking a grinder to the good idea fairy's lock. You know that, right? And he's like, I know. And I'm like, great. So, all that to say is despite how much experience you get, and as you're still a young guy, I don't care, not as young as George, unfortunately, but I'm still a young guy with I think for age range, a pretty fair bit of experience in leadership. Despite how much of experience I have, time in the military and everything else I've done, there's always something to learn. And I've said this to my people before: the day you stop learning is the day you stop being useful.
Awesome.
So, how does that sound?
Awesome.
Uh-huh.
That's spot on.
Yeah, I love it.
Who's next? Heather, George, you got something? You want to pepper me with a question or two?
I'll fire away.
All right, Georgie.
All right, so you've interviewed a lot of great leaders. What would you say is the number one common denominator in all the leaders that you've interviewed?
Oh, credibility. Credibility. And we talked a bit about that earlier, but everybody you talk to, if you boil it down to some form or another, credibility comes out of that conversation. You look across the three episodes I did with you three folk, and credibility is part of those conversations. Heather, build your credibility to keep your employees longer. George, we talked about credibility and leading older people and how you can be credible. And sometimes that is a matter of just saying, hey, I don't even know. What do you guys think? Right.
Yep.
And Keisha, again, credibility in developing people professionally through their training systems. Credibility is cornerstone leadership, and that comes out with every single episode, one shape or another. The person may not say necessarily credibility, but it's there in one shape or another. So, nope, that's definitely a common denominator. And if I throw on a second one, it would be, respecting and treating your people properly. Right. And because, as we said, they're the reason for our successes. So
that's good stuff.
Those two.
Huh.
Heather? Yeah.
I'm just thinking. Let me think. Okay. So now that you've done what you've done, you've reached this milestone.
Yeah.
Do you foresee yourself making any tweaks or changes going forward? Are you going to do more formats like this, in between, scattered throughout, is there another milestone you're looking forward to, and things like that?
Yeah. That's a really good question. Basically, i.e. the future of Move Forward Leadership podcast. And I just slipped in a Canadian A accidentally. There are multiple factors to play right now. One is I'm changing jobs this summer. And the second thing is this started basically as a hobby to keep myself out of trouble while my wife was going through medical school and residency. So I spent a lot of time alone. And I was like, hey, I might as well be productive. That's coming to an end. So I kind of have to balance that now with having a wife again. And on top of that, I also have to balance with upcoming workloads. I'm being slated for multiple courses, which is going to tie up my time. And on top of all that, we are expecting our second child come September.
Oh, congratulations.
So, right now, the audience don't realize this because we are actually, I'll say it, we're recording on the 26th of April. And I believe off the top of my head, this show is due to be released on the 20th of June. I recorded an episode there the other night, and that one's due to be released, I believe, the 17th of July or something. So I'm kind of working through the summer right now because I'd like to take my summer off from recording a lot of episodes, interview episodes at least, just so that I can enjoy my summer. Wife and I, my families, we're big campers, so we have a trailer, a seasonal lot, and we spend all our weekends up there. So I kind of would like to enjoy that. Now with the baby coming, everybody knows the first 3 months are, you might as well write them off with the new baby. So all that to say is I think the future will be probably returning back to how the show started with more solo shows on my thoughts and how I'm seeing things and probably responding to current events. A little bit less interviews, unfortunately, because I love the interview shows personally. I love meeting new people. I love getting chat like you three great folks. But I just don't really foresee the time availability. Like I'm doing this completely on the side. Like this is not a show. And I've mentioned this a few times to the audience, like this is not a show that this is it for me. No, I'm doing this with my full-time military career and doing this on the side for you folks. So I think we're going to go back probably to more of a solo thing and then fitting in interviews as I can. And, but I think for major milestones, and we'll see how this one goes and how the audience responds, but major milestone, episodes, I definitely like to have people back. And I even talked to all three guys about having you guys back on the show. And here you are now, you're back on the show. So that's kind of the way
Yay! This is fun.
There's a whole lot of, I don't knows right now. But
sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's absolutely
pepper them.
It's I'm thinking I have a lot of shows in the hopper right now. As I said, like the next one recorded will go into late July. I have one recording next week, and that one will be late July. And there's pros and cons for doing that. Obviously, I may look at sprinkling more in individual shows to spread out the interview shows, so I get a bit of more of a mix. But
cool.
There's risks that I take with that. And for George, who's starting off a podcast, and Heather, who just started off a podcast, and Keisha, we talked about you and potentially you starting off a podcast. The risk is you lose momentum with the person you interviewed and them being excited about promoting your show. Mm-hmm. So, which kind of gives you more exposure, right? As more people.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if someone, you message someone up 3 months after you interviewed them, and you're like, hey, who are you again? Which is, what are you talking about?
That's good to know.
Right. Yeah. You want me to promote this thing? Oh, wow. That's my voice.
Yeah.
So it's a risk analysis that I have to do. And that's just life as a leader, right? The same thing in any situation you're in. So as a leader of a show, I have to do my analysis, my risk analysis, weigh the factors, pros, cons, and all that jazz. The show will continue on. My goal is to continue weekly for sure, even through the summer months and early newborn baby months. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Your eyes might be holding your eyes up with toothpicks, but you'll be there.
Yeah. The good thing is, we get, great maternity and parental leave benefits up here.
Oh, good point. I always hear about that in Canada.
Yeah, we do. So, my wife will take a year off, with basically her salary intact, and I may.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we can talk about that offline. I don't think the audience want to hear about that. But anyway, I may take a couple of months off on top of that as well, if things line up properly. The wild card will be if I get selected for a military course, which is equivalent for a master's for a year, not this coming summer, but next summer. That's the wild card. Because that will be an intense amount of work.
Wow, you have a lot going on. A lot of decisions.
Line them up. Let's go.
That's the wine talking. That's the wine talking.
It was only half a glass.
The other day, I know we're wrapping up. The other day, I talked to someone and someone I really like and care for, but when she was calling me and she wanted to have me be like the voice of reason of like, oh, just kind of take it easy on yourself and just kind of do this and that. And I said, I have to tell you, you're really talking to the wrong person. I'm like, you see, I go at Mach speed with my hair on fire all the time. I'm not, and I don't give myself slack, and I'm not going to do that for you.
Right. Yeah. Did you know who you called? Like, you dialed the wrong number with this one. Yeah.
Let me recommend someone for you.
Yeah.
Awesome, folks. Let's wrap this up. This has been an absolute amazing conversation. I thank you guys for coming on the show. I thank the audience who are still listening to us laugh and joke and carry on. Thank you for listening. You're the reason why we're here. Not just me, but all four of us you're here. We're here, I should say, to help you become better leaders. And honestly, that's just the goal of moving forward leadership. I do have a secondary goal to make this my second career once life after the Army is done. But that's still another 8.25 years down the road. All right. Folks, any last words before we punch out and have the post-show celebration?
Nothing from me. Been great.
I think we covered it all. I'm super excited with the success your show's having and to be on episode 50 and can't thank you enough for the platform. And Heather and Keisha, loved the conversation. I'm sure this won't be the last time we chat, but cheers to a big rest of the 2018.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, Heather, thanks so much for having me back. And I thoroughly enjoy it. I love talking to people where I can bounce ideas off of and we can have little mini debates. And my brain is like, you're being used again and challenged. Awesome.
Awesome. Love it. Awesome, folks. Heather, Keisha, George, thanks for coming out. Audience, thanks for listening. There are no key takeaways today. It's simply enjoy what we had to offer. All right, folks. Again, keep pushing, keep trying, keep moving forward. Take care.